Den of Thieves 2, Pantera is directed by Christian Gudegast and stars Gerard Butler, O'Shea Jackson Jr., and among others. And this is the sequel to 2018's Den of Thieves, where Gerard Butler returns as Big Nick, who is pursuing O'Shea Jackson's character after the events of the first film, and embarks them into Europe, where they're having to essentially do a heist that goes down, and it's up to Nick having to essentially working with O'Shea, with Donnie, in order to get this diamond, and it gets into some other stuff that involves the mafia. Now I'll leave it there because if you've seen from the trailers, it's pretty self-explanatory the way that the plot goes with this, and it basically becomes if Den of Thieves 1 was Ocean's 11, this is basically Ocean's 12 with it taking place overseas and doing a heist this time. Now here's a little backstory. Now the first Den of Thieves that came out in 2018, I gotta admit, when I was going into it, I just thought it was gonna be like your typical, heist type of movie, gritty type of crime drama like we used to get from like the 90s and 2000s, which I do miss those type of movies. I'm glad we still get them that come out here and there. I did have some kind of issues here and there with the first one, with it being very familiar with trying to copy Heat and a lot of things with the whole cops robbers kind of approach and the way that they do kind of familiar story beats. But I was still entertained by it, especially with the performances, especially from Gerard Butler and O'Shea Jackson Jr. and even Pablo Schreiber in the first one. I thought that Schreiber in the first one. I thought that the cast really made it really work, and it was definitely entertaining with a lot of the stuff that was going down with not only the characters involved on both sides, but even the heist that takes place and the stuff that gets really intense toward the third act. And so I remember really enjoying the first one, but I remember the ending really getting to me to where I was kind of thinking that they were probably going to do a sequel. But I didn't think it would take this long because this is now 7 years later and we finally get the second one. And going into this one, I kind of went into just open expectations because this was kind of like very quiet on the marketing, where the trailers for this only came out like probably a few months probably in advance before the movie came out. And much like in the first film, which if I remember came out in January of that year in 2018, this one came out this year in 2025, and it's like, it just seems like Gerard Butler has been on this trend where he's releasing films that are coming out in January of all things, like he did a couple years ago with Plane. And so I went into it just open-minded because I didn't think much of it, because I thought that the whole him joining the crew and stuff was interesting, but I kind of figured where the plot was going and stuff. And after upon seeing the film, I can say that while I do like it, I do feel like it fell short as a step down compared to the first film, because there were some things in this film that I feel like could have been a lot better. But I was still at least thoroughly entertained by it, but still wish it could have done some stuff that I was hoping it was going to really, push more with. Now, to get my pros out of the way, I thought the cast in this, especially Gerard Butler and O'Shea Jackson, they really carry this movie. They are not only phenomenal like they were in the first one, but also just the way that we get some really fun camaraderie that happens between the two, where, Gerard Butler, he's basically getting all, chain smoking, he ends up doing drugs, he's drinking, all kinds of stuff, and the way that he's really trying to, having to get into the crew and stuff, I thought was not only very fun to watch, but just the way that you can tell that Gerard Butler is just having fun with this role, because he really, goes for it. And the same thing for O'Shea Jackson Jr. He really, is the guy that is just trying to really do what's right for everything, because there's some stuff that goes down with this character that I won't spoil, but essentially has to do with the reason why he's doing this heist to begin with, over some things that have to do with the mafia and all that. But I'll leave it at there. But it does they both really carry the movie in their own right, and the way that the score also really sounds too. It's not only very gripping, with it kind of has this. Well, if you've heard from a lot of that genre called lo-fi, it has a very lo-fi type of vibe to it. That's something that you would probably hear from Drive, or in some extent even from Michael Mann's Heat in some parts. But in a good way. I do like the way that it captures the mood in a lot of scenes and stuff. It's definitely going for that kind of film noir, and also to an extent with another Michael Mann movie that I was thinking of, Miami Vice. It definitely has that kind of feeling for it. The movie version of Miami Vice. I know a lot of people don't like that one compared to the show, but this was giving me, and I actually, funny enough, I actually prefer that movie over this one. But I'm just saying, in a complimentary way, it was giving me vibes of the whole, exotic locations and stuff, and the music was kind of, and the way it's kind of filmed in that kind of style makes a good kind of double feature with it. Even though I still would prefer to watch Michael Mann's Miami Vice over some other stuff. But with that being said, there's still some other things I really appreciate, especially the action parts when we get into some really intense stuff that goes down in the heist. And on top of that, when we get into the final climax that takes place, not only were the gunshots really well uh, the sound for the gunshots were really great, and the way they captured that whole kind of gritty, grounded feel to it. There are some suspenseful moments, especially when we get into the actual heist that takes place. And there's even some other stuff that I was still wondering where the film was going and all that. And there's definitely a great payoff that takes place where we get into probably something that's going to set up another sequel. One of the other things I do have to at least appreciate as well is how this one, we get into a little bit more of the arc that's involving where Gerard Butler's Nick is having to see a lot of this. We get to see like little moments that takes place where him and Donnie are talking about their lives and stuff like that. Those moments really do shine in their own regard as we get to know more about our characters. And there's even something I will admit was pretty clever. It definitely added layers to Gerard Butler's character, where there's another character that he comes across that adds some like humanity to him in regards to like what it's like, because that he basically has pretty much nowhere else to go in the whole like family life and everything, and essentially he's become now a loner. And so they do touch on that really well, and I do like the art they give with him in this. I just think that there's more they really could have explored a lot better with, because the writing just felt a little bit more thinner compared to what the plot is. Very a lot more. The plot just doesn't really take too much. Does have it to where it feels like there's more that they could have really pushed more at stakes. They could have pushed more of the stakes in this. Now this is where I kind of fall into more of my cons. And as much as I was like seeing where the film was going, and while there was some really fun stuff that was to behold, especially with everything that's happening with the two main leads, I did feel like the movie fell short with not giving us much of a supporting characters, because the rest of the crew that they actually set up in this, I didn't really find as much like compelling this time. They have some moments here and there that are kind of fun to watch. Like this part where Donnie is trying to listen to music, and then you have one of the other crew members trying to jam their music. I thought that was a fun scene, but it just really needed more of that to really flesh their characters out and stuff. And on top of that, it really seemed like there wasn't really much given to what the stakes this time, because when we get into the actual heist takes place, for a while things were going, it was really keeping me interesting the way they played out, especially with some of the ways they're sneaking in and stuff like that. That was really clever in parts. But it really seemed like there's points in the movie where things get resolved a little too easily. You know what I mean? Compared to the first one, where stuff was like really going on to where it was trying to that they were trying to avoid suspicion at all times. And that's one of the things I do prefer the first one also as well. Even though I do at least see if even though in this one they did try to up it up, they try to amp it up with more of the other things that happen with villains that come along to try to take down our lead, or take down the crew and stuff. It just also really seems like when we even also get to the climax that everything just seems to get really like kind of like cut short, and I'll leave it there. It just really seems like there was more that they really could have added on to really push more of it. But that also falls into a problem I have with the pacing, and that is one of the things I also did have an issue with the first film, is that it didn't need to be over 2.5 hours. There's definitely some stuff they really could have cut out, or at least trimmed out in some cases, maybe about 10-15 minutes. This one does run overboard, where it's about 10-15 minutes too long, and it didn't need to be almost 2.5 hours. There's some parts, especially in the beginning, that they really could have shortened down to really kind of get to where we're going, because for about the first 40 minutes it was running a little too slow to where I was kind of having a hard time really following what was happening, even though I get what they were trying to set it up with. But once we get into where Nick and Donnie are having to set up their plan and stuff, that's where I was feeling like more where the movie was going. But it takes a little while to get there before all this stuff goes down. And so there's more I can go into detail, but this is definitely one of those films that I'm at least glad I've seen it. But I still prefer the first one, even though I was still entertained in aspects of this one. I just felt like, it could have been a whole lot better. And so with that, I'm going to give it a high average Joe on the Film Freaks meter. So for those of you who have also seen Den of Thieves 2, Pantera, and also the first one, let me know in the comments below what you thought about it. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.